Welcome to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein, talking about the evolutionary, the revolutionary, the inspiration and the perspiration, and those aha moments that change everything. And now, here's your host, Rich Goldstein.
Welcome to Innovations and Breakthroughs, where I feature top leaders in the path they took to create change. Past guests include Joe Polish, Roland Frazier, and Rick Cesari. This episode is brought to you by my company, Goldstein Patent Law, where we help you to protect your ideas and products. We've advised and obtained patents for thousands of companies over the past 27 years. So if you're a company that has software, a product, or a design you want protected, go to goldsteinpatentlaw.com, where there are amazing free resources for learning about the patent process. And you could email my team at welcome@goldsteinpc.com to explore if it's a match to work together. You could also check out the book I wrote for the American Bar Association that explains in plain English how patents work. It's called the ABA Consumer Guide to Obtaining a Patent. I have with me here today Giles Lury. Giles would describe himself as a Lego watch-wearing, Disney-loving, Canon photo-shooting, Chelsea-supporting father of five who also happens to be a senior director of a leading strategic marketing and brand consultancy, The Value Engineers. He has over 30 years experience in the business, and he's known for his creative spark, his storytelling, and his ability to constructively challenge conventional thinking, which has led to him being given another title, Director of Deviancy. He's the author of 8 books on marketing, including 4 storybooks, in which he relates short marketing tales, drawing out a lesson from each. He's a regular contributor to the Marketing Press and pieces published by the Marketing Society and MediaCat, and writes for 2 blogs, the Prisoner and the Penguin.com and the Wonder Women-marketing.com. I'm very pleased to welcome here today my friend Giles Lury. Welcome, Giles.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And among the books that you wrote, you actually compiled a lot of tales of innovation. There's a book you wrote called Inspiring Innovation, 75 Marketing Tales to Help You Find the Next Big Thing. And for people listening to this podcast, often that's what they're on a quest to do. They have a notion of what might be the next big thing. They're looking to find a path towards making that a reality. So I'm just really excited to get into some stories here about innovation, of people who've taken that road and taken that concept and gotten it out there into the world. So really up to you where you'd like to start, and I'm just excited to hear interesting and inspiring tales of marketing and innovation.
Lovely, thanks for that, Rich. I think I will probably start close to home for you, so perhaps a couple of innovation stories that involve the importance of legality, copyright, and owning your rights there, and then perhaps go on to some interesting sources of inspiration, because there are some really quite strange ones of that. But perhaps the one to start with is the chairman's wife. Oh, well, it's not quite the chairman's wife. She was the wife of a senior executive at Mattel, and her name was Ruth Handler. And she was watching her daughter, who was called Barbara at the time, playing with a paper doll. And she was really interested that the paper dolls weren't being used as surrogate babies, but as adults. And at the time, she thought, this is really strange. There aren't any adult dolls on the market. Why is this? She left pondering this, and the family went on holiday to Switzerland, where in a tobacco shop, of all places, they saw a 12-inch high doll of a young female, a rather voluptuous female of the time. And they went in and they bought 3, or she bought 3. She gave 1 to her daughter, Ruth, and 2 to her husband, Elliot, who was actually the guy. And she said, you should make these dolls for the girls. And it was suddenly an eye-opener for them in terms of what they were doing. The interesting twist, though, was the doll was actually a model from a cartoon strip in one of the leading magazines out there, Das Bild. And it was known as Das Bild Lily. And she was a somewhat risque, very voluptuous one. So her figure was slightly toned down by the time she was launched into America. And of course, they were looking for a name for her. And the name they gave her was after Rose's daughter, Barbara. And of course, this is the beginnings of Barbie, of that, and sort of many years later. What was interesting, however, is this sort of slightly questionable background. So what Mattel did was buy up the rights to Lily and slowly phased her out of production in Germany and Switzerland, where it should be done, by making sure that they owned and controlled the rights to do that. And therefore, Barbie was free of her past and ready to go and, woo the hearts of many, many, many children in years to come.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I guess it's interesting, first of all, how Barbie originated. I never heard that story before. And that essentially someone had an initial idea and they built it to a certain level. And then another company, a bigger company, came along and purchased that from them. And they actually had a bigger vision, a different vision, but still the vision created by the originators of Lily, that was, they had fulfilled a valuable piece of the innovation, which was creating adult dolls that for kids to play with, which was not something that existed prior to then. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great one.
The other one, the other legal one I thought I'd probably, which you might well enjoy, takes us off to the south side of Chicago, way back, probably in the sort of 60s and 70s, where Leo Stefanos set up a confectionery shop, which was fine during the winter and he had no problems. But in the summer, his two children would listen out for the ice cream van. And when they heard that, they'd go herring down the street. And he was really worried that they were going to get knocked over or what would happen with them. And he decided he'd try and put his confectionery skills to different use. And he created an ice cream, a large block of really good vanilla ice cream, dipped in proper chocolate on a stick. And it was the Dove bar. And he started selling it, and it was a great success around Chicago. And it wasn't until the 1980s, when he went to a state fair, that knowledge about it started getting bigger, and he started to export it all across the country and go all around. And in 1986, it was acquired by Mars. Great, lovely little story. There is, however, a twist in the tale. The tale was that in 1987, an executive from Unilever was on holiday in the States, and his children came across the Dove bar and loved this rich, creamy vanilla ice cream covered in real chocolate that cracked when you bit into it. And their dad cottoned onto this and said, they really like this. And so when he was back in the UK, he told them all about it. And in the UK, Unilever got very interested and created the Magnum bar. Now, the Magnum bar has grown on to be $1 billion brand for Unilever. It is also well known, and whether this is true or not, the story goes that it is the source of the phrase "steal with pride." And this is an innovation technique that's often used about, is there something else out there or in another country or another way of doing things that you can take and you can make your own? But in this case, because the IP rights were owned in America, Magnum was free to go and operate elsewhere, completely free of any restrictions.
Yeah, and that's how it goes with IP rights, is they're territorial. throughout the years, people have had successful businesses by launching something in a very different part of the world than where it already existed. And it's interesting thinking back to the Mattel example previously. Mattel probably didn't need to buy the rights to Lily to make Barbie. You can't really own the concept of making an adult doll. And so if they wanted to make their own doll of following that concept of creating an adult doll for children to play with, they were likely free to do so. But they did go ahead and buy the rights from her. And I think the interesting thing to highlight there is that it kind of undermines an important myth about big companies and stealing ideas. Is that people think that big companies, they are essentially the wolves and they will steal your idea and leave you with nothing. And the truth is, most of the time, they will err on the side of caution and buy rights to things when they think that either they might need to legally, or it would create a bad public perception if they didn't compensate the originator of a certain concept. So often they'll go beyond even the IP for the sake of PR and for the sake of just that they're too big to really want to get involved in some little disputes. And so I think that's an interesting thing that came from that. And then on the other side of it is here with the second story is it's kind of clear that a lot of times if you don't have IP rights that cover you in a territory, you are leaving yourself open to having others pursue it there, because your IP rights are geographic, they are jurisdictional, and you want to keep that in mind in terms of where the potential market for your product exists.
So one final legal story for you then features Anita Roddick, who was just setting up the Body Shop, the beauty and bath store that was set up in the UK in the mid-70s. And she got the name for her shop from going around and seeing car factories, car repair shops in the States. And so she decided to call it the Body Shop. However, where she set up in Brighton was on a high street, and at either end of the high street were two coroners. So there were all the people there. They weren't too pleased with this new shop set up in the middle called the Body Shop. They thought this was going to be bad for business for them. And so they sent a solicitor's note to her saying that they were going to, take her to court over the name. Anita Roddick was nothing if not resourceful. She phoned up the local paper and planted the story about poor single woman who was just starting out on her business, who was being attacked on both sides by these well-established brands over a nothing attack on her name. And surprise, surprise, the case soon got dropped and the Body Shop went from strength to strength. But it is just quite interesting sometimes when you get to naming just the issues of legality in and around it, and just how whenever you start out with whatever name you start out with, someone will find something wrong with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And, I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit to something that's more of the day-to-day that you do in marketing strategy. And so we were talking a little bit before about the next generation of brands and how things have really shifted. So yeah, if you'd like to talk a bit about that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how things have shifted in the next generation of brands.
Yeah, I'm, as you can tell, somewhat of a historian about brands. I love digging into their past. But one of the things that has interested me is sort of the evolution of branding and how that has gone through various stages, and how it started out, obviously, with a mark of ownership. You branded a cow or whatever in terms of there. But it moved on into the marketing world, where it really took off in consumer goods, the sort of packaged goods that we all see and buy off supermarket shelves. And there was the age of those. Perhaps in the 1980s, you start to look at what starts to emerge, which is the age of service brands. And a lot of the service brands, whether those are airlines, banks, telecoms, all of those come into their own. But there seems to be a new generation now. If you look at the most valuable brands in the world, the ones that are really at the top are tech, content, direct consumer brands. And what is interesting about these brands is they're not playing by the same rules. They play in different ways. When you were a fast-moving consumer good, you spent lots of money all the time, because if somebody was going to make a choice about a soft drink, they'd make it every day. Whereas if you're Netflix, you've only got to get somebody to renew once a year. That puts a completely different spin on how you go about doing things. When it comes to what you ultimately deliver, increasingly consumer goods, because they are easy to copy, have become much more personality-led. And it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it that's important. However, what's really interesting is for these new brands, it's the customer or the user experience that is so important. And that's why that focus is on. And it's interesting that in firms like Amazon and Google, the chief marketing officer now reports into the chief experience officer, and how that is changing. And I just think this fundamental change in branding and attitudes towards branding are going to be really important as we look forward. And I'm starting to explore this, starting to write some articles about it, and you never know, there might be another book in it at some point.
Cool. And so that's part of the shift, I guess, that you mentioned is just in terms of the sales cycle too. It's like there are products that we use on a subscription basis that are kind of in the background, and we don't think much about the purchase until it's time to renew. And some of those are on automatic renewals. And some of them we have to affirmatively take a step to renew. And I think part of what you're saying is that the companies need to do things along the way to strengthen your branding image, so that when it comes time to make that second transaction, it becomes a no-brainer. So it's like, they're not necessarily going to kind of present the full value and make the sale on that day. You just might not even be open to it at the moment if you hadn't been thinking about it, if you hadn't been using Netflix or whatever it is that's renewed. But subtly, what they need to be doing is along the way, little reinforcements of value. Is that fair?
It is, though it's also interesting to think about how that different companies now will focus on product features, where often in the past, a lot of the consumer goods were very image-led. And it's not to say that, Apple doesn't have a great image, but Amazon and some of these other ones really focus on what they functionally bring to you. And that shift back to functionality is quite an interesting one, where if I produce a sparkling water, it's yet another sparkling water. What's going to be different? And it's often about what I believe, what I do, what purpose I've got behind me. Whereas some of the things that Amazon do, no one else can do yet. Some of the things that Netflix can do, or the content it's got, is unique. And so there is a shift back towards some more functionality in amongst that, as you rightly say, that build-up of an image, that build-up of the love for the brand that's going to make the final sale.
Got it. So penultimate question, what's the thing about marketing for brands that really lights you up? What do you enjoy most in this realm, which you've been participating for decades?
I think it's the challenge. I think it's increasingly the challenge has been that a lot of markets that I've worked in are long-established markets. They may have been shaken up or disrupted, or they may have got to the stage where it's quite competitive. And trying to work out how you do new things in new ways to actually cut through the noise. We all see, I've forgotten what the latest figure is, something like 5,000 commercial messages a day. How do you cut through those in a way that brings your brand to the fore and gives it some increased interest, some increased excitement, some increased appeal, and understanding your customer, delivering them a great customer experience? The challenge of doing that is something that is fresh every day and keeps me going.
So cutting through the noise to have your message heard, and then how to deliver a superb customer experience.
Yeah, I think for me, I suppose I started out in advertising. I'm no longer in advertising. For me, it's how do I bring the total brand to you in a way, and that is probably customer experience led first. Messaging may well come after that, but how do you position your brand? How do you create a proposition that really excites and interests people?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And so if people want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, how do they go about doing so?
Probably the two easiest ways. The first would be to look me up on LinkedIn. I'm there and fairly, consistently publishing things or commenting on things. So by all means, look me up there. Or go to any good bookseller of that. There's a certain large one beginning with A and has got a Z in it too. And look up my books there, and you will probably see them there. You mentioned The Prisoner and the Penguin was my first book of stories, not purely innovation-based, but a whole mix of why brands are important, innovation, marketing strategy, little stories, rather like these.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes. And the book is Inspiring Innovation, 75 Marketing Tales to help you find the next big thing. And that is available on Amazon. We could say Amazon.
Yeah, I thought you probably could. Yeah, I've been talking about it so much. I've been British here where, the BBC wouldn't allow me to do that,
Right. Got it. Well, thanks for looking out. And in any case, I really appreciate you taking the time to do the interview, Giles. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at innovationsandbreakthroughs.com, and we'll see you next time.